love is the one thing we're capable of perceiving that transcends dimensions of time and space.
So what's your podcast about?
Oh, it's about psychology, true crime, supernatural stuff, the occasional paranormal or philosophical rant.
Well, maybe I could check it out sometime.
Do you have any idea how crazy you are?
Stop waiting for life to be easy. Stop hoping for somebody to save you. You don't need another person lying to you. Things don't all add up. Face some hard facts and you could have an incredible life.
Unforgiveness is the number one reason why they're getting tormented and why there's sickness in their lives, because they're angry and they're bitter, and these demonic spirits keep giving them thoughts. And then what do? They trigger on their current relationships. And you need to start practicing taking thoughts captive.
Never forget what you are. The rest of the world will not. Wear it like armor, and it can never be used to hurt you.
I draw a hot sorrow bath in my despair room with a misery candle burning. I wash my hair with regret shampoo after cleaning myself with pain soap. I dry myself with gorgeous white, 100%, and it will never change towel. And I go to sleep. When the hue has gone blue,
and you can't quite grin and bear it, let this word picture remind you it can always be worse.
This is your nautical lantern on the dangerous seas of darkness. Let's push off from the placid shore of the status quo and explore what's beyond the horizon. I am your host, BT, and this is Truth and Shadow, your podcast of the supernatural. We live in a world where the line between the psychological and the spiritual feels thinner than ever. People are hurting, confused, overwhelmed, and sometimes terrified by what's happening inside their own minds. And when someone reaches that breaking point, when their behavior shifts, when their emotions erupt, when their personality falls apart, it's easy, almost too easy, to assume the darkness must be supernatural. But a true search for truth requires humility. The shadows of the mind are real. Trauma can mimic torment. Anxiety can look like oppression. Psychosis can produce voices, visions, terrors that feel ancient. Depression can hollow a soul until it believes something else must be living inside of them. And for centuries, long before modern psychology had language for any of this, people mistook the storm inside the human brain for the soul work of demons. This is why discernment isn't optional. It's the first act of compassion. Not every negativity is a spiritual battle. Sometimes it's panic disorder. Sometimes it's unresolved grief. Sometimes it's bipolar mania, misread as some kind of manifestation. Sometimes it's PTSD flashing like lightning behind the eyes. But dismissing those very real conditions, and by jumping straight to possession, doesn't make someone spiritual. It makes them reckless. The church fathers knew this, so did the desert monks. Those ancient exorcists, the ones with more scars than stories, insisted that the most dangerous mistake wasn't to fail to see a demon,
but to see a demon where there is none. Because once you slap that label on a suffering person, you trap them inside a false narrative that blinds them to the healing they really need. And if the enemy wants anything, it's confusion. Real possession is rare. Mental anguish is not. And the human mind and its mystery and fragility deserves honor, not suspicion. And so before we invoke the supernatural, before we call down the Calvary of heaven, before we diagnose someone's soul with the darkest word we know, we should take a pause. We should listen and evaluate. Let the person in front of us be human first, not a battleground to be conquered. Because if someone is truly dealing with mental illness, calling it a demon won't set them free. But compassion, clarity, and proper care just might. So maybe the real danger isn't the demon we fear that is hiding in someone's shadow, but the truth we refuse to face in our own. We're wired to look outward for the supernatural threat, the lurking entity, the unseen force corrupting the human heart. But sometimes the darkness isn't some kind of external intruder. It's a wound, a fracture, some kind of trauma. A silent scream buried so deep that we mistake it for something alien. And that's the part that keeps me up at night, the possibility that most hauntings, possessions begin inside of us, long before any kind of spirit knocks on the door of our hearts. So before we cast out demons, maybe we're meant to cast a light into the psyche, into the trauma, into the places we're too afraid to explore. Truth is, the mind is a labyrinth, and every labyrinth has a minotaur, but also a way out, if we dare to follow the thread. There are some subjects that society tells us not to talk about. Politics, religion, and then there are those shadow topics we almost can't talk about it because they live somewhere between fear and fascination. Exorcism is one of them. If you're not a Christian, it might sound like a relic of the Middle Ages, a frightening ritual reserved for the superstitious. But if you are a Christian, maybe you see it as a curiosity, a story you've seen in movies or read in a book, but never encountered it personally. And for some of you, it's not just a story, it's a reality. Exorcism is one of those strange things that meets at a crossroads of psychology, theology, and culture. It forces us to ask, what's really going on here? Some kind of power of suggestion? Witnessing something ancient? Or is it the mind's way of manifesting our inner wounds? Or could we be brushing up against something darker, something that can't be explained by science alone? Today, we're bringing in someone who stands right at the edge of that tension, past the Hollywood versions, past the tabloid headlines, and into some of the psychology that makes exorcism one of the most sensitive, unsettling, and profoundly human topics we can explore. Ken, welcome to Truth and Shadow Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brendan. I appreciate the introduction. Thank you so much.
So before we start, I would really like for you to just tell me some of your background. We want to basically, before we get into some of this psychology, some of this stuff that is behind the idea of exorcism, I'd really like to back up a little and have you share a bit of your journey, your personal journey, which first led you even into studying like looking at the human mind and what it is you do.
Right. So my name is Ken Torres. I'm a medically retired U.S. Marine. So I was in the Marine Corps, and I did my time honorably. And not only that, though, I'm just a person who loves my faith. I grew up in the faith. I grew up in the Protestant faith my whole life. And as I got older, I started studying and I started learning more about the different avenues of Christianity, and Catholicism and Orthodoxy interested me. But throughout that process, I'm a person who was hurt, who suffered, who's dealt traumatic brain injuries, who's dealt with PTSD, a person who has been completely broken by the nastiness and the toxicity of this world. And it was through my faith that I was able to be grounded. It was through my faith that I was able to, ultimately just become a better version of myself. I went to private seminary school. I got my master's in pastoral counseling, which means I'm just a chaplain. I talk to people. I've worked with veterans. I'm involved with a lot of veterans organizations. And ultimately, a few years later, that led me to my theological studies as a doctor of divinity and theology. And basically, what I do is I try to point people to the truth. I try to help people out the very best way that I can within the authority, that I'm given. So much of what we see in this field and in the paranormal, there's a lot of negative connotations, or there's a lot of self-diagnoses, or there are people that reach out to teams that are amateur in nature and have no experience dealing with the supernatural. And I say supernatural because paranormal is not one of my favorite words. Paranormal for me is cryptids and Bigfoot. For us, for the faith, it's the supernatural. The supernatural is naturally infused by what we believe in as Catholics and Orthodox, and just Christians in general. So that's who I am. I'm just a man, in obedience, trying to help people understand what they are facing spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and potentially leading them back to the truth, to reconciliation, to healing, to understanding that this wasn't as scary as social media or all these other people project it to be. What if those demons that you're talking about are the ones inside of you?
We'd been talking a little bit before the show started about some of your background. Why don't we talk about your faith journey? I mean, let's look at where you've come from and how you view the development of your view of paranormal, of the supernatural. There was a growth in there.
Yes, I mean, there is definitely a growth. There's a maturity, and then there becomes a point in time where you want to be more accountable. So with me, I grew up with supernatural experiences, growing up back east. My grandmother from my mom's side was a high practicing Santeria practitioner. That's a practice within the Caribbean. It's like Afro-Cuban and Catholicism mixed together. So I experienced a lot of those things, but I also experienced miracles, and I've seen people healed. But I've also seen the negative side. I've seen the negative attacks. Our family was attacked by an entity. And so I wanted to understand what that was. And throughout the years, you get those impressions, and those things are imprinted in your mind, and you want to understand what they are. Then roll maybe 2004, 2005, you start seeing these ghost hunter shows, and you start seeing these equipments, and you start seeing these gadgets, and you're like, oh, so that's how you're supposed to do this. That's how you're supposed to investigate. That's how you're supposed to understand what the supernatural is. And as you get older, tools are wonderful, but what's the quantitative and the qualitative state? Like, what good can this equipment do in that sense? It might be able to capture something, but what I'm looking for is something deeper. How do I explain what I'm seeing? How do I explain what I'm feeling? How do I convey this activity to a family that might be experiencing something? So that's where the accountability comes in. And that's where I went back and I started looking at the church fathers, the desert fathers, scripture, which is important for us. I firmly believe, and I'm not trying to make this an apologetic show as we spoke, but, from the faith, we have 2,000 years of tradition in scripture that can help us understand what these things are. And so I found it refreshing, and I found it honest, and I found it true to be able to go back to my faith and understand the type of activity that we're experiencing. No, not everything is demonic. We understand that things are allowed to happen. We're allowed to see loved ones. These things happen. We don't know why. And so that's what kind of led me into this journey of accountability. It's like, there needs to be something more than just equipment. There needs to be something more than just surrounding yourself with the white light. There needs to be something more than just burning sage. And so I found that within my faith.
Right. You had moved, like you said, from Protestantism onward. I mean, what was that journey like?
Right. So for me, being a Protestant my whole life, I was never exposed to the traditional canonical churches. I didn't, know and understand Catholicism. Although when I was younger, I was a baptized Catholic. But then I lived with my grandmother, and we grew up Protestant. We grew up Pentecostal. We grew up Baptist, going to church 4 or 5 times a week, always praying. And so that was ingrained in me. That was imbued in me. But what was also ingrained in me was that tradition and Catholicism and Orthodoxy and all these other beliefs are evil, right? So I had this genuine hate for something I didn't understand. And throughout my seminary training, I started understanding church history and the councils. And so that led me more into the theology. And so I fell in love with the tradition. I fell in love with the old church. I fell in love with the Catholic and the Orthodox Church. So much so that after, my seminary training, I joined this religious order. And this religious order was Catholic in nature. This religious order was supposed to be an old Catholic institution or a Catholic organization that was independent from the Vatican, which I should have seen the red flags. Independent from the Vatican. What does that mean? That means that, yes, we have Catholic priests that are Catholic in nature, but they don't affirm the Pope. They don't affirm the structure and the authority of the church, but we're allowed to operate within our own authority. And I didn't see the problem with that until a few years later. So I worked in the ministry with good intentions, but good intentions can only get you so far. It wasn't until a few years ago that I realized that this order that I was a part of was a defunct, invalid, and not illicit order. Just a bunch of dudes dressing up as priests and bishops, giving themselves their own authority. And so I fell into that trap. I fell into the trap where I thought I was something that I wasn't. Even to the point, check this out, Brandon, even to the point where a few years later I was given the title of a bishop. Wow. What does that mean? Well, I had the Protestant mindset because I graduated from a Protestant seminary school. So for me, the bishop was always a senior pastor. But then when you study theology and you understand the traditions and you get called out a couple of times and you're like, that's not right. Yeah, I mean, it's just a bishop. What does that mean? You begin to see the inherent error and the danger. How can I be a bishop 2 years into this calling when in reality, to be a bishop, an archbishop in the Catholic and the Orthodox Church is to be of servitude. It is to be in obedience. It is to be a part of the actual body of Christ and not separated. And so that's where I was like, I need to do something because now I'm in error. I love God. I love this ministry. I love helping people. I've given out so much advice, but it's basically like a surgeon doing surgery without a governing body, without ethics, without someone to say, hey, you're not being accountable. And so that transition led into the Anglican Communion. I joined an Anglican body. So, and what does that mean? Although the Anglican body is a Protestant church, it is they have a high service, so it's high liturgical service. It is called high church. And so I joined them. And then I began to understand the problems that people were seeing. I began to understand that I was wrong. I began to see that although this is Protestant in nature, this is how you're truly supposed to worship God, the sacraments, that sort of thing. It's important. And I understood the importance of structure and hierarchy. And so by the grace of God, through my seminary training, with the blessings of my family, I reached out to the Orthodox Church because my views were already Orthodox. We were independent or old Catholics, right? And we got to be careful with that because we'll have people that say that they're old Catholics but in reality, those old Catholics are not old Catholics. There's only one body that I know, Bishop James Long. I know him to be a true, valid old Catholic bishop. But apart from that, no one else. And so I was seeing the little groups that were forming on Facebook. I started seeing all the different callers in the play, but something inside of me was just like shattered. It was wrecked. I already believed, I had this certain belief about papal infallibility. I had a certain belief about the filioque. And so what that meant was, yes, you are Orthodox in nature. And after prayer and discernment, I reached out to the canonical Orthodox Church, and I've been accepted. So I am currently in the process of the incarnation into the canonical church. Under a metropolitan, under the Most Holiness Patriarch Bartholomew. And so that has been a refreshing and humbling experience, because everything that I thought I knew was completely shattered. The theology was Western. And so I'm in this process right now where I've humbled myself and I've given up all of these old bogus and dubious titles. People used to know me as Archbishop Ken or whatever. No, I'm just Ken or Father Ken. And I'm in this process. And because of that, because of the errors that I've made, I've shut down the old church website, and we're in full obedience to the church right now. So that's where this journey has led me, because in the military, accountability is everything. And I have to be accountable for the actions. I have to be accountable for the mistakes that I've made. And you cannot be a priest, a Catholic priest, or an Orthodox priest outside the fullness of the church. And I'm sorry, that's the truth.
This is how I had found you. I had been looking at the Holy Sword Apostolate with Father Bob, and I saw that your name is associated with this, and I would like to know how you got involved with that ministry, and specifically, let's tell people what that ministry does first, and then let's talk about your involvement with it.
So the Holy Sword Apostolate was founded by Father Bob Bailey. Most people would know him from like Paranormal State, associated with Ryan Buell and Lorraine Warren. We actually met each other earlier this year through a good friend of ours, Joe Frankie. Joe Frankie, he also runs the Warren Society. We knew each other from the Warren Legacy Foundation. We moved on, and he created his own organization. And so we met through the Warren Society, and the introductions were made by Joe Frankie, and we just started talking. And the idea of the Holy Sword Apostolate is to help people find peace and deliverance, right? Not an exorcism ministry, but to genuinely help people understand what they're facing, like pray for them. Like we have prayer groups, we have prayer teams. We have individuals that are psychologists, that are mental health professionals. They're willing to talk to people who are facing, whatever problems that it is. It's not just supernatural. If you need someone to talk to, if you're having a crisis of faith, if you're having an issue, if you have questions about the faith, you come to us. And so I was involved in that, after prayer and discernment, because Father Bob is a real Roman Catholic priest. And so that came through prayer and discernment and understanding the process that I was being in. He's like, you're good because you are now a part of this church, right? An Anglican church, although it's Protestant, but that's valid and that's licit. And so he invited me and I became the co-director. And so my job as the co-director is just to assist Father Bob and help those who are reaching out to us for help.
Because your experience is specifically in helping people with mental health. And so let's talk about addressing people where they are when they're having these issues and how they come to you. And it's like, look, I think I'm possessed, but let's really step back and look at this and go, look, there's a little bit more going on. Let's talk to you. Let's find this out. Let's see what's going on.
A lot of what we see on social media, a lot of what we see from a lot of these other exorcism groups, it's very surface level. You have most individuals that they read a Bible scripture and they think that, oh, cool, I've been called to perform exorcism ministry. But exorcism ministry is a vocation. It is something that's deep. And it's something that requires years of training. It requires discernment. But you have to start from the basics. You have to start with the human. Understanding what they're going through, what their psychological needs are, what traumas they're facing. Like, are they addicted to drugs? Are they addicted to opioids? Have they suffered any trauma, sexual abuse, that sort of thing? So we go back to basics and we understand who that person is. We talk to them, we get to know them, we become their friend, and we become a listening ear. And after we build that relationship and we build that rapport with him, we can say, hey, you know what? We don't think you're possessed, or we don't think it's a demon. These are the things that we would love for you to do. Let's try to get you back into a positive mind state. Let's get you back to work. Let's try to get you back to a healthy relationship with your spouse, with your children. You're having financial trouble. Let's see if we can find some resources to help you out. So before we do anything of the spiritual aspect, we're focusing the human needs, because it's important to do that. You just can't sit here and say, well, I feel like there's a spirit on this person and I'm going to pray it away. It doesn't work like that, because you cause more damage. And I've seen that. I've seen people who call themselves bishops and people who, do all of these sorts of things, and even priests, and they have this need or this want to be relevant, and they pose more danger to others. They don't look at the human need. They don't look at the psychological factors, and they're not qualified, and so they cause more harm. And so that's where the Holy Sword comes in. That is where our methodology comes in. We have a 20-page assessment sheet for the Holy Sword Apostolate, and it covers everything from drug abuse, family history, medications, that sort of stuff. It's not meant to determine whether or not you're possessed. It's just, it helps us understand who you are as an individual, as a person, because believe it or not, we can pray for you, but a deliverance prayer or an exorcism, that takes time. That takes discernment. That you have to understand the physical needs, the emotional needs, the psychological needs, and the spiritual needs. And if you're not addressing those first, then you're jumping directly into an exorcism. You can pose a significant threat to those, or you can feed into their psychosis, or you can potentially do what one of my old clients did. Either hurt themselves or kill themselves because of the lack of information, because of the lack of knowledge, because people think they know more than a 2,000-year-old institution. They think they know more than the church fathers. They think they know more than psychologists. They think they know more than people who are actually qualified to deal with these things.
Yeah, that's a good point, because the process because I've spoken to a couple of other individuals who work with Catholic exorcists, and one of the major aims is they sit them down with a psychologist, usually first, unless something else is going on. I mean, I've heard stories of, hey, this kid's acting out, and they bring him in and they just sit him down with the assistant, and the guy, the kid sees like a picture of a saint, and he freaks out and he does stuff that's not really human. So it's like some of these things, it's like, that's obviously not normal. But the rest of the time, people come in and it's they're dealing with a need for deliverance from their own inner parts, their own dynamic mental state. And so from kind of your mental coaching aspect and the involvement in that kind of mindset, what is it that you really find is the most helpful to start looking at a person and helping them through the situation, that this isn't a possession or an oppression. This is something that is going on because we have more than just the devil. We have the world and the flesh.
Exactly. And one of the tools that I find most helpful, and it's crazy, it's mind-blowing. This is so advanced, it's going to blow your mind. And the tool that I use is sitting down, shutting up, and listening to the individual, being there for them. I find, and I learned through my experience, that at least 80 to 85% of the time, sitting down with people and talking to them and listening to them and helping them vent has been fruitful. It's been helpful, and you can measure that success. You can measure that. We talk about quantitative and qualitative states. You can measure when a person is happy. You can measure when a person just feels fruitful. You can measure when a person is reconciliated with their loved ones. And so it's always about listening to the individual. It's about getting to know them and understanding what the dilemma is. Like, why do you think you're possessed? Let's not worry about why do you think you're possessed. Let's talk about you. Like, what are you going through? Like, what's your day-to-day life? What's your family life like? What are the stressors currently right now that you're feeling those things help out. As opposed to, all right, you're saying you're possessed, cool, there's a demon there, so we're just going to go ahead and pray it away. No, listening to people. That is the most mature and responsible and ethical thing that you can do. And even if a person is possessed, and let's say they're floating on the ground and they're levitating and they're doing that sort of thing, there's still a mental aspect that has to be addressed because it is still a traumatic event that, they are facing. Either they'll remember it or they don't. So you still have to address the physicality and the spiritual needs. And a great example of that is the Annalise Michaela case. We had a young woman that was possessed. That was a devout, faithful Catholic, and she was possessed. And we're not going to get into why she was possessed because that's always a question, right? But it happened, right? It happened, right? And there was these clergy here, and I might be wrong. I'm not trying to misspeak. They were so devoted to trying to help her out that there was a negligence of the physical needs. No food, no water. And she ended up dying. And I believe that if those things were properly addressed, she probably would have lived a longer, healthier, fruitful life. So those things are important. The small details. They say that the devil's in the details. No pun intended.
I think it's interesting that our minds are wired in a way to want to explore the unknown or the knowable unknown. We're trying to find answers. And so I'm wondering, just from your own mind, from your own understanding, what do you think it is that exorcism or this idea of the demonic, why does it grip human imagination so strongly?
I think we could go back to pop culture. Obviously, everyone knows or have seen The Exorcist. And throughout the years, we've seen different movies. Pop culture, I think, has had a significant influence in how we view these things. But not only that, though, like you see the social media networks, but I think people want something to blame. It is easier to blame a demon. It's easier to blame the devil. It's easier to blame a spirit than to blame ourselves. And that is a cold, hard truth. It is really hard for us to sit down and evaluate ourselves and say, hey, I have these flaws with me, these fundamental flaws. I've made some mistakes. These are things that I should be accountable for. And so we just want to flip the narrative. And so we build this narrative and say, well, all of these bad things are happening to me because it's got to be the devil. It's got to be the demons. It's got to be the demonic. But they never say, hey, maybe this is happening because of me. Maybe I'm experiencing something. Not that it was intentional, you have underlying issues that you haven't taken care of. You have some wounds that need to be addressed. And so chance or randomness, something happens that you can't explain, then you want to blame the devil.
A good answer for that question, because it could very well be we're trying to externalize our own inside. I do a lot of stuff and a lot of shows about Jungian psychology, and I do look at the idea of the shadow and the unconscious. And I do understand that we do have, as humans, issues. We have parts. We have places in our own mind that can very well have their own dynamic personality, I guess, is a word that can be used. We need to look at exorcism through a more psychological lens, see what it reveals about us. And so what do you and the apostolate help to handle fear, guilt, or even trauma?
Right. So, and all of that is just, it all depends on the scenario. It depends on the situation, specifically the client. We talk to them and we ask them, like, how do you want us to help you? What are your needs? How can we help you out? What is it exactly that you want us to do to help you with? And so we ask those questions and we try to understand what they want. And so we develop a plan for them. Okay, so you want healing. What type of healing? Spiritual healing, emotional healing, spiritual healing. Okay, cool. Go back to the church. Go back to the sacraments. Talk to your local priest. Talk to your local pastor. Start participating in the sacraments, right? But we understand that there's also that psychological factor. If you're not mentally well, then it's going to be pretty hard to focus on going back to church or even living a fruitful life. And so we just develop these plans based on what the individual needs are. We have individuals that are capable of setting up plans. We have individuals in the apostolate that are well and capable of just sitting down and talking to them and coaching them and helping them devise goals and say, hey, we're going to work on some short-term goals. This is what we would like for you to do this week or for next week, and we'll talk to you and we'll follow up with you. Are you meeting these goals? Are you achieving these goals? Or, because the biggest problem that we have as well, and we see this a lot, people come to other people for help and they're just like, well, let's just go ahead and pray it away. But no one wants to put in the work. And that's a fallacy. We just can't come in and wave a magic wand and it's all gone. You also have to put in the work. The family has to put in the work. You also have to have faith in what you're doing. Most people I've spoken to were like, well, you're the fourth person I've already spoken to. And I give them advice. Well, the other three guys told me the same thing. And it's not working. It has to work because we know it works. So that you're doing something wrong. You're shopping or you don't have faith in what you're doing. And I asked him, and this is a really particular question. Are you reading scripture or are you praying because you were told to do so? And do you have faith? Are you doing it just because you were told to? Or do you really have faith in what you're doing? And 95% of the time, the answer is, oh, I'm doing it because I was told I should do it. Well, there's the first problem right there. You don't have faith. You don't believe in what you're doing. You're doing it because you're afraid, because you were counseled. But there needs to be something more deeper. You have to have a connection. And yeah, prayer is great, that sort of thing. But you also have to want to put into work. You want to have to change. You want to go see your psychologist. You want to go see your therapist. You want to go talk to your doctor and say, hey, I got some stuff in my body that is not feeling well. Can we take a look at this? Ruling out all the factors. So we try to help the clients keep themselves accountable as well. And so we give them tasks.
Yeah, I think there's something else that should be looked at, and that's the power of suggestion. And I bring that up because a couple of reasons. More and more individuals are finding themselves scrolling on Facebook Reels, YouTube Reels, Instagram Reels, TikTok, etc. Any kind of reel platform. And depending on where their interest is, the algorithm adjusts itself to meet the viewer's needs. And so occasionally you will get strings or strands of videos that are related to paranormal stuff, supernatural things. And they always have like the scary music behind them. And so what I'm looking at is when we talk about that power of suggestion, that people expect a supernatural event, they might want to start to experience one in their minds. So how much of that, in your view, is fueled by expectation and belief and not supernatural reality?
I mean, I think that's a hard question to answer. I definitely don't have statistics, but I would agree with you a lot of that. A lot of it is also playing off of your emotional intelligence. There is an expectation that I notice. Most people want to investigate and they want to experience something supernatural. They have this need to want to feel a demon or see a demon or experience something. It's like, why do you want to do that? Like, why do you want to experience this? And so I think that with the expectation, there's a confirmation of what's out there. Most people have expectations and they need to be met for whatever reason. So how do we get them out of that mindset? People can be easily manipulated. It's just like, for example, you can put a picture on a social media feed and say, I see a picture and there is a face in the window of a ghost. And you post that and you're going to get 150 different responses, right? You know what that is? That is playing off the emotional intelligence because people are going to give different interpretations. And that's dangerous and that's problematic because now you're creating this mindset where you can feed into people's psychosis. You can feed into their need of wanting to see and experience something. So that also can be dangerous. So, when we manipulate people's emotional intelligence, that's also problematic. And I think that's one of the issues too that I see. People are easily manipulated. People are easily influenced. And so there's this need and this expectation to want to experience the supernatural or the paranormal, so to speak.
Within that same question, that's a real big question. So if we pull a little bit apart, and we look at some of the dynamics within it, we're going to look at the opportunity of giving people mental health tools. What are some of those simple, everyday tools that you've found to be the most effective for people who feel like they're being pressed down, like they're anxious all the time? They feel like something is oppressing them.
So for me, it's more than just prayer. I try to motivate and inspire people. Like, you know what? You're not feeling good? Go outside, get some air, take a walk, go to the park, sit down and do some breathing exercises. Because when we look at the dichotomy of all of this, we are complex individuals. Everyone is different. Everyone has different needs, different goals, different expectations, different emotional standards, so to speak. So I try to tell people, hey, breathing exercises, meditating, going out and living life. Stop hyper-focusing on these things. But we also need to understand in terms of the paranormal, if you're doing investigations and that sort of thing, it can also be a coping mechanism. Most people have this coping mechanism because they want to understand what they've experienced. And so I would say the supernatural, according to the psychological standpoint, can be a healthy coping mechanism, but we just need to be careful to not get so involved in it that it consumes us. And that's one of the biggest issues. We get consumed. And so when we get consumed, we don't know how to disconnect from it. So that is the dangerous part. So you disconnect, you go out, you live life, you do some breathing exercises, go to the park, walk, talk to someone, do something that doesn't really relate to this whole supernatural thing. You don't want to get so entranced in it that it consumes you. And I see that all of the time. People live the paranormal. They live the supernatural. That is who they are. No, you are not the supernatural. The supernatural is just a byproduct of this reality, of this human existence that we live in. So to say that I am the paranormal, that is a dangerous mindset, because now that's not coping. That is an extremist view on the supernatural. You become the supernatural. You get infused with it. You get consumed by it. And now all of a sudden, you don't know how to do anything else. And that's where relationships and marriages start falling apart. So you have to be able to disconnect. I would say the best advice is disconnect for a little bit. Give yourself time to live and breathe and live this wonderful, beautiful life that we have out there. You don't always have to be involved at investigating haunted locations.
Yeah, definitely some of the best tools out there. Go outside, ground yourself, breathing exercises, meditative mindset or mind space. With what you guys are doing with the Holy Sword Apostolate and this coaching work, specifically with you and Father Bob, what are some of those patterns that you've seen? And I'm talking about the patterns that make a person more vulnerable to actually being influenced by the supernatural.
Right. So some of the patterns I would say that I've seen, people that have weak emotional states, people that have gone through some significant hurts, some significant trauma, they are more open and adept to be influenced supernaturally. And so some of the patterns I would say that I've seen are just people who are not well mentally, physically, and emotionally. And it's because they don't know how. It's because they don't know how to. They don't have the tools. They don't know how to ground themselves. They don't know how to be productive. And so that's where we come in. We want to help you understand, hey, you need, and that's really the biggest thing is like live your life. You need to be able to live life. This trauma, this hurt doesn't define you. Can we help you find reconciliation? Can we help you find healing? What does that look like for you? What does it look like for you if you're able to breathe again and let go of that hurt? Now, letting go of the hurt doesn't mean you dismiss everything that's happened to you, but if it's consuming you so much, obviously it's not healthy for you. It changes who you are. The stress is one of the biggest factors that I think as humans we all face. So if I'm feeling stressed, I need to step back and say, what is stressing me out? What is bothering me? Why am I triggered by this? What started this? What is the origin? And so those are some of the tools that we help people identify. Whenever you're in a situation and these feelings arise, you ask yourselves, whoa, wait a minute. Why am I feeling like this? What started this? Where did I go? Where was I? Who was I talking to? Who, what, when, where, why? It's important. But most of the time, the patterns of behavior are people who just don't really understand how to ask for help, or they've gone to get help and they haven't been given good resources. And so they fall in this continuous pattern of just depression and anxiety. And there's a moment where they feel good, and then all of a sudden it comes back again. And then, oh my gosh, it's the demon again. I'm okay. A few weeks later, it's the demon again. Okay, we need to address that, because those are important feelings that can't be dismissed.
Right, and let's go ahead and let's dive into some of that supernatural stuff now. I mean, we've talked about a lot of it being mental health and really addressing some of the issues in the background. And so I just want to spend just about 10 minutes here, and we're going to talk about the reality of the demonic, the reality of what I call the sinister forces. And my listeners know that sinister forces are defined as the fallen angels, the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, and those humans who work in cooperation with them. These are the sinister forces. And so when we just use the word demonic, that is usually an umbrella phrase for something that is in this evil, dark place, supernatural. So let's spend a little bit of time and let's actually talk about the reality of the demonic, the reality of the dark forces that are in the world, and what people are dealing with for real in this.
Right. So we understand the church, the faith, Christianity, we affirm fallen angels, and we affirm and we know that there are demonic entities. But they're not as powerful in that sense because we have authority over them. There is this fixation where people are in love with the demonic, and that itself is dangerous because you can open doors. I would say not portals, but you can open doors to the sense where now you are calling these things. But they're not always running rampant like people think they are. It's not like you're always having a demon with you, talking to you, trying to possess you. According to the church and the authority of the church, they can only afflict you with God's permission, right? But most of the time what we see, I tell people, like, if you close your eyes and you breathe a little bit and you open up your spiritual eyes, you'll see the angelic beings and you'll see the demonic forces. And to me, the way I describe it, it's like the demonic, they're like whispers in the wind. They see you, they observe you. They can't really do anything because they don't have permission, but it's like whispers in the wind. How susceptible are you to those whispers? How are you influenced? How are you being influenced by these voices in the wind? And so when we open up that portal and we open up that intriguing ideology of, I need to know more about demons, I want to understand them, I need to study them, and you're just asking for trouble, because you're giving them more authority and more power than they need to be. So we have authority over these things, and that's plain and simple. So the demonic is one of those things, though, as well. We've seen a rise in social media. We've seen the rise in the demonic cases or the haunted objects. But it is true. There are people who are suffering legitimate demonic possession, and that requires experience. That requires permission from the church. That requires discernment, and that's a process that takes time.
Yeah, and let's just pull back a little bit to your childhood here. You spoke that you had family who were involved in Santeria, and I think that's an interesting one because what I understand with Santeria is that it often blends this cultural identity with spiritual practice. But from your experience and from your own background and what kinds of spiritual dangers come with opening yourselves to that ritual?
Well, yeah, there are spiritual dangers. There are inherent dangers because for us, as clergy, as cleric, and even as Christians, we should always be operating in a state of grace, constant repentance and prayer. And so the problem with that is you become enamored with the power that comes with it. There's that power. And I'm sorry about the noise. I've got the garbage truck today. All of a sudden, he just decided he was going to come at 11:40 without, he's normally here at 8 o'clock in the morning. So sorry about that. Yeah, so there are inherent dangers. Just like, the inherent dangers of, like, you can read a book and understand the book, like the Book of the Geisha, the Lesser King of Solomon. You can read about those books and you can understand it. But when you start practicing it without experience, you start opening doors. You start to begin to experience things that you never knew that you don't have any control of, because you don't really have control, especially if you don't know what you're doing. So yes, there are significant dangers because that allows you to become influenced. And in my experience, from my grandmother, from my mother's side, she was a dark santera. She did things for money. She did things to hurt other people. And I saw things. I saw chickens sacrificed. I saw goats sacrificed. Some people say, well, no, that's part of the culture. Yeah, but it was the intention behind it. It was sacrificing this goat or sacrificing this chicken so that this husband can go ahead and commit murder or commit suicide or that sort of thing. So the intentions behind it were evil. And we experienced things. We experienced shadows. We experienced voices. I remember there were times where I would wake up with bruises and I would hear these snarls and these growls. And I was afraid. I was afraid because even within that practice of Santeria that was darker in nature, there were things that as a child that I should have not been exposed to, that I was affected by. So yeah, there are inherent dangers in spiritual, not spiritualism, but spirit communication. Maybe Uncle John is not Uncle John. maybe the spirit that you're calling upon and you think it's a little boy, it's not a little boy. Yeah, maybe this ritual that you're doing may get you some money and some wealth, but all of a sudden, a few months down the road, your family's severely affected or you get some really bad disease. There's always a price to pay. There is a price to pay when you're dealing with the spiritual, when you're dealing with the realm. And I've been, in the past, I've been kind of like PG-13, and I've kind of just been like, you know what, I'm just going to say things because I don't want to offend anybody, but that's where I've made a mistake, as clergy as well. It's like, no, there is a danger. Stop messing with the occult, stop conjuring. Stop messing with spirits, stop using Ouija boards, and stay away from these sorts of things, especially if you're not in a proper mental state. We had a situation a few years ago, Joe Frank and I, we were giving a lecture in upstate New York. It was Dark Waters Paranormal Convention. And so I was giving a lecture on mental health and demonic possession. But during that time, we encountered this individual with his friend that kept on walking by us. And he was mean mugging me, man. He was just like, mean mugging me. And I was like, hey, come here. Yeah. I was like, hey, come here. And his friend was like, no, he doesn't want to talk to you. He didn't know there was going to be a priest here. And then his friend comes by like a few minutes later. He goes, hey, man, sorry about that. My friend doesn't like you. He doesn't like you because you're a priest, you're a caller, that sort of thing. And I go, okay, that's fine. You don't have to like me. He goes, no, there's a problem. He's been dealing with the occult. He's been conjuring up spirits. He's using all of these different ritualistic things, and now he feels oppressed. And I go, oh, okay, well, let me talk to him. And so I spoke to the individual. His friend came up to me, and I said, what do you see and what do you feel when you see me? And he went off on me. He let me have it. He ripped into me. His eyes turned black. Then I gave him a cross that was blessed. And when I put the cross in his hand burned. Okay, it was the steam. So there was the imprint of the cross in his hand. So Joe and I were like, okay, so there's something here. We can't do an exorcism because we're at a public place. And so we asked, do you want us to pray for you? And so we went into a room and we prayed for him. Not so much a deliverance, but we just did a prayer to help alleviate. And all of this was a result because he wanted to get back at his family for doing things to him, for abandoning them, for making him go through the suffering and the pain and the trauma he's faced. And all that was a result of messing with the occult and putting bad and negative intentions and getting something that he didn't know was going to be negative. He was calling to, I guess, some other gods of the ethereal realm for power, for prosperity. And it turned out to be something more sinister, to the point where his vocal features changed, his face changed. During that prayer, while we were putting holy water on him, the marks of Jesus Christ of the crown of thorns were showing. He was bleeding on his forehead through the holy water. So that is a result of messing with the occult and not being in the right mindset.
See, that's what's really interesting, and that is a part of that's a dynamic of the supernatural is individuals do not realize that as human beings we have the power. The Bible tells us we're not supposed to, but because we're not supposed to, that means we can do it. And that's, I think, missed. And a lot of individuals who don't understand the reality of the occult, they find themselves in it. They find themselves in it because it gives them a sense of belonging to something. And I think that needs to be addressed. And what can you tell somebody? What can we say to somebody who's feeling like they're on that edge? They're standing there on the edge like this guy was. He was trying to get back at his family. But they're standing there on the edge. They can't really name what they want to do, but they know something's wrong. What kind of practical advice could you give them?
That's a deep question. Sit back, come to us, let's talk. Let's go have a cup of coffee. Let's go find out what's bothering you. Let's get you some friends. Let's get you a good support system. How can we help you? How can I help you? What can I do for you? How can I be there for you in your darkest day? What is it that you're looking for? A sense of belonging? You've been isolated. You're abandoned. I'm sorry. It's not your fault. It's not my fault. It's not your fault that you were cast out or that you were bullied. None of these things are your fault. So being a good human being, being kind, being there for those individuals and saying, hey, I am here for you. We are here for you. I want to be your friend. I want to get to know you. Let me help you. Help yourself. That's some good advice right there. Because we can say you can go back to church and you can go to prayer, which is important. Faith is important. I believe in the power of prayer. I believe in Jesus Christ as a savior. But sometimes people are not trying to hear that. People sometimes want someone to listen to them and be there for them. And so I will be on that edge with you, holding your hand. I will try to guide you back off of that cliff. Let me be there for you. Let us be there for you. Let's guide you. Let's get you back to where you need to. Let's be your friend. We'll be your family if you need family, if you've been abandoned. Whatever it is that you're going through, let me carry that burden for you.
No, that's real good sound advice. Yeah, reaching out to people who are there, that's very important because people do feel like they're alone.
Right. And it's surface level advice. But sometimes surface level advice is the best advice you can give. Because once you get to know and you understand beyond the surface, transformation starts happening. I think a lot of people, sometimes they want this detailed explanation and they want you to go into theology and they want you to go into psychology. All that stuff is wonderful and great, but we need to understand that some people, if not most people, we just need to keep it simple and say, hey, I am here for you. Let's get to know each other. Let me help you out.
Yeah, it really sounds like basically here at the end of the day, this all just comes down to the fact that we're all human beings and we're all wrestling with something. We're all wrestling with shadows or with our own shadow, as Jung would say. What encouragement can you give to someone who feels like they're losing the fight with themselves?
There's always a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's going to be hard to get there. But make sure you surround yourself and try to get yourself a good support system. That's important. Having a good support system, having friends and having family that you can talk to is important. And we're not meant to be alone as humans. We're meant for companionship. And I find that most people sometimes when they're going through these things, they're alone. They have no one to talk to. There isn't a support system. So try to surround yourself with a good support system. Find yourself that one person that will listen to you, that will walk with you in that darkness. And then through there, you'll start to develop this culture of reconciliation and healing, which can lead into bigger things. It can lead into a profound transformation, which can also lead you coming back to your faith, which can also lead you into opening up the idea, oh, you know what, maybe I need some counseling and maybe I need some therapy. But find yourself a good person that's going to be there for you. That's the most important thing. You're not alone, and it will get better.
Yeah, that's great. One of the last things that I like to do is go ahead and just give you an opportunity to self-advertise, self-promote, tell people where they can find you, other things that you're working on, things that you're doing. places that you're going for whatever you've got planned for 2026?
So right now, the only thing I have planned for 2026 is I'm going to be doing an event in New Orleans. So I'm going to be doing a lecture with Father Bob at New Orleans. It's going to be I believe the first New Orleans Paracon. And so that's what I'm going to be doing next year. This year for me, it's been profound transformation. Currently I'm under strict canonical obedience. So getting into the canonical Orthodox Church, a lot of studying, a lot of prayer, a lot of phone calls with my spiritual father. So right now I don't have much going on because I'm in full obedience to the church, but I will be doing this event next year. And you can also find me on Facebook. If you want to talk, if you need guidance, if you need someone to be compassionate, I can be that listening ear. But what I won't do is I'm not here to offer you exorcisms or deliverance. I don't do that anymore. I don't do that anymore. And that came at a price, and realizing and understanding that, I was operating out of the structure of the church. So I won't do that anymore. I will listen to you, I will guide you, and I will point you back to the fullness of truth.
Cool. And your website, drop some links.
So I have a website. It's called fatherkendoctor.com. But more importantly, I want people to focus on the Holy Sword Apostolate, holyswordapostolate.com. That is going to be the primary way to reach me and Father Bob. And if you need someone to talk to you, if you think you're experiencing something, reach out to us as well. And then, like I said, I also work with Joe Frankie, spiritual advisor. I'm part of the Warren Society. So there's also that as well. But reach us at Holy Sword Apostolate.
Fantastic. Well, Ken, I really appreciate you coming on my show and having an opportunity to talk about some of the deeper things that are within our own psyche, our own mental state, and not just focusing on, let's just talk demons, right? So thank you very much for coming on my show, man.
Right, yeah. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. This was very refreshing. It made me have to go into, it made me brain a little bit. So I had to brain my brain for this one, so to speak. But it was good. It was refreshing. I appreciate that. It's nice to see that there's a different focus and there's a different shift other than the
So thank you for coming on the show. Have a good day.
Thank you. Have a good one. Thank you.
You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Thank you for listening. This is a free podcast based upon the value for value model. If you find value in this, or any episode, you can return that value by liking the show, subscribing to this channel, leaving a review, or sharing with a friend on your social media accounts. You can also donate on my website. Thank you again. This is BT for Truth and Shadow Podcast. You are the light in the darkness.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. You take the red pill. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more. You stay in Wonderland. Believe whatever you want to believe.